What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Thinking Project. And of course, this is your host, Dalton Jensen. If you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. That helps the show out incredibly, and especially when you guys share it with your friends. So if you find this valuable, make sure that you share it with your friends. And I hope that you guys enjoy this episode because I got to interview Taunya Brown, who is a creator, innovator, advocate. She has over 20 years of experience in business as an owner and founder, experience as a designer and brick and mortar franchisor. Taunya is known for being a featured event planner on TLC, and she was recently named Utah's 40 over 40. She's a single mother and is currently earning a master's at USC. She's all around just a badass. I loved this interview. It was so fun to hear her talk about all the issues that were really important to her and to all of us, and to shed some light on some pretty amazing topics. So please stay tuned. And remember, this show's not sponsored. The way that it keeps going is when you share it with your friends. And if you're in sales and you want to learn more or sharpen your sales skills, go ahead and join my sales training group, Empathetic Selling Solutions. All of those links will be in the description below. Enjoy the episode, and thank you so much for listening. All right, Taunya, I don't do any fancy intros, but thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So how do you navigate the world of business as a single parent?
That's an excellent question. It's $1 million question. As a single parent, I navigate it like most parents do. I allocate my time. I prioritize. I try to be present when I'm with my children. When I'm at work, I try to just kill it. So single parenthood, it's hard to understand unless you've been there.
Yeah.
Right? You always, when you are in a cohabitation situation or a second parent, right? You always have that extra set of hands. You always have a fallback plan. You always have someone who could go run the carpool. You always have someone that you could divert, attention to if you've had a long, stressful day. You can say, "Hey, child, please go talk to so-and-so, the other one." And as a single parent, you just don't have that. So when that phone call comes in, and I'm in a meeting, I'm going to answer. I'm going to step out. I am going to mitigate my time appropriately so my kids know I'm there for them. So navigating it as a single parent there's an added layer of responsibility, but it's doable. It's very doable.
Yeah. Now, and you work at Brandless, and you do a lot of other things, and we'll get into that for sure. But I wanted to ask, because there's a lot of these conversations happen, whether it's you're a single parent, and so you have to navigate that conversation with your employer, right? Or if anything like that happens, right? Because you're also a big advocate of women in business.
Absolutely.
So we have to, but I feel like those are, generally speaking, those are pretty difficult conversations to have. Well, hey, I'm a single parent. If we're, because you're also pretty high up at Brandless, right? So if you're in a meeting, if you're in a top dog meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And you're I got to split, right? How do you, how did you set up that conversation? Was it scary for you? How did you roll through all of those emotions and navigate that?
That's one of the things about being a single parent. Scary or not, you just do it. So let's just set that as a baseline. You just do it. Yeah. I would back off of that even a little bit further back in my career when I was becoming a single parent and I was being faced with that. I just had to make up my mind, okay, what are my no-go areas? Where are my parameters? What type of companies do I want to work for? And am I willing to sacrifice certain things? And gratefully, thankfully, I just kind of had to dig my heels in and find a little bit of grit and say no when to say no, know when to say yes, and try to find that balance. So as I've gone through my career as a single parent, there have been times I've missed opportunities, absolutely, because I've had to say no. And there have been other times where I have been sitting across from someone and really explained to them very heartfelt, and them understanding my value and knowing what I bring to the table, and that I will work 10 times as hard as anybody else, that because of my situation, that they have been very understanding and very flexible. Mm-hmm. So your question was about Brandless. Brandless is a unique situation. And the reason I say it's a unique situation is because we're fortunate enough to have people like Sid Tetro and James Clark, right, that are at the helm. Matt Durham, right, he's the president of Brandless as well. And they're all very family oriented. They're all very understanding people. they do, each one of them has a family, children, that type of thing. And they've been very, very open to understanding what that looks like for their employees. So for me, no, it wasn't scary. When James and Sid actually approached me about coming to work for them at Brandless, I jumped at it. I was like, absolutely. When do I start? You know, because they had become close to me in a professional way and in a personal way, and to my children. So they really understand the dynamics. They understand, you know, the burden on your time and responsibilities. It's been awesome. So when you say, was it scary? No, absolutely not.
For Brandless, it wasn't scary.
No, for Brandless, it wasn't scary.
But earlier in your career.
Absolutely. Any parent being faced with that.
Yeah, that's tough.
Especially in you know, whether you're male or female, you know, any parent that has to go to an employer and say, look, my children need my time. You know, an employer thinks about it in a lot of different ways. Sometimes think about the bottom line, the time, the restrictions. You're not going to be in that meeting. How can I access you? You know, those types of things. But at the end of the day, I think setting up your priorities and understanding what matters to you and being able to speak about it eloquently and amicably, and also being able to show up in those times when you're not being the parent, when you're at work being that employee, you know, being able to show up in the ways that you need to, I think brings a lot of value to the table.
I like that. And I kind of want to explore how you decided what boundaries you were going to set. Because whether you're, again, like single parent, or like these things, I think your situation is so cool and unique because there's a lot of like lessons everybody can learn from it. Like, and so like picking those boundaries, that was probably a really difficult decision. Like, look, no matter what happens, I have to do this, even if, as you said earlier, right, like you might lose opportunities. So what was your hierarchy of figuring out what boundaries to set and what not to set?
I think understanding the health of my children is highly important. You know, it's not popular to always say your kids need to be a little bit independent. Sure. They need to be able to self-manage, you know, self-regulate, you know. You know, there are lots of schools of thought and a lot of ways that we've been told to raise our children, right? Yeah. For me, as long as my children are happy and healthy, I'm going to be okay, and they're going to be okay. And sometimes teaching them, look, I need to be able to answer this phone call. Are you okay? Is everything good? Everything's in order, you know, and having them be able to recognize, oh yeah, I'm totally fine. Yeah. Like the world's not falling apart right now. Mom just needs to answer a phone call, or, you know, I will not be able to answer because I'll be in this meeting from this time to this time.
Right.
Do we know what an emergency is? And do we know what just, oh, my brother's poking me, you know, and what that is, right? So for me, being able to set those things up with my children, personally recognizing what is healthy for my kids and what is not was really, really important to me. And it obviously it varies family to family, right?
Yeah.
So everyone's situation is different. For me, I just had to define what that was.
There you go.
And be okay with it.
Right.
That's the hardest part.
It's like second guessing yourself, like, was this it? Right.
Oh, I still do.
Yeah, you still do.
I still do.
Okay.
I still do. Oh my goodness. No, so I'm also in school. I'm also in a master's program at USC.
Heck yeah. What are you getting your master's in?
Oh, it's a Master's of Science in Project Management.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool.
I bring that to the table because even last night, my daughter is 14 at this point, right? And her brother's just left home. He has launched. So it's just the tween and I at home. And you know, I still have these classes that I have to attend, and I still need to get schoolwork done and turn it in. This is aside from the day job, right? This is in addition to that. Right. And I'm still at this point, even though I've been a single parent for about 8 years now, I'm still at this point questioning, you know, oh shoot, I need to get this done. I need to get this paper turned in, and my daughter's headed to bed. Do I need to run upstairs and say goodnight to her? You know, because when they were younger, that was part of the parameters.
That was it. Yeah. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. I get it.
Yeah. Tell me about. No, I want to hear about that. Yours are still young, so I mean, you probably have set up those parameters of like, what is healthy for my kids?
Right.
How do I show up?
Yeah, and it's always like a constant battle of like, are they getting enough?
Yeah.
Right. Because funny enough, like, I'm also in a master's program.
Are you?
Yeah. So I'm getting an MBA.
Good for you.
Doing school, navigating those classes, and then figuring out like, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the fact that like you just got to be really like open with people no matter what, because it's just going to come up.
It will. It absolutely will.
Interestingly enough, this creates a really fun segue into. And if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know, that I'm a huge, like, so I'm a girl dad, but I'm a huge women in business and like women empowerment and all that good stuff. Had sit on, Robin Cohen, Susan Peterson, all these heavy hitters. And so it naturally comes up because part of this is like, I want this to be like a journal for my daughter and my son, but to like hear these kinds of things. So you're not only navigating the world of a single parent, which is already difficult, right?
Yeah.
And then you're a woman in business, which I know is probably not the easiest thing, right?
It's not. It's not. We still have a lot of socially accepted things that we consider norms, and they just oughtn't be. And then, you know, when you boil it down to Utah, even though go Utah, that's an amazing place. I love Utah. I love Utah for so many reasons. Just culturally, there's become a conundrum or a dichotomy with women in business, just because of things that have become normal in this state. Mm-hmm. So actually the list of women that you mentioned are just juggernauts here. They're absolutely amazing. And they are really, really pushing through some of these boundaries and these barriers. So being a woman in business is difficult anyway, because, I mean, statistically, there's still that pay gap of about 30% male to female ratio, if you identify that way. There's that 30% gap. I was actually reading, it's kind of interesting. I was reading in Forbes just the other day, and it was talking about how with the gap, the way it is between male and female people in business, it will take until 2059 for that gap to be closed at its current rate.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yes. And actually, when you hit the age of 35 and above, and of course I'm above that by a few years.
Sure.
I'm above that. The gap actually increases.
That makes sense. Less women are in the work. Is that, I mean, less women are in the workforce, and the ones who do have to fight, I'm sure, harder.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And then all the variables that come into play. You were just talking about being a girl dad, you know, regardless of how you identify and where you sit in the politics, it's predominantly female who stay home with children. Yeah. You know, it is predominantly female who have the most impact from having children. Right. Paternity leave is awesome, right? Yeah. For both parents, but it is usually the health affects the woman who has had the child. Right. So the reason I bring that up is because those are types of things that we don't compensate for in the workforce. You know, we don't look at, okay, she's been out for 3-4 months on leave, whereas maybe a partner can go back to work and keep working. Right. So I'm technically 3 months behind in understanding what's been going on in the company. Right. And I have to kind of catch up. So anyway, there's lots of variables in there, but it is a little bit more difficult being a female in the workforce.
What kind of, so you mentioned some of the things, because this is what I love to get into, right? You talk about like women in the workforce, there's a huge pay gap. I agree with you there. The craziest thing that I've heard and that I've seen is not just like pay, but like access to capital, like women's access to capital. When I heard that blew my mind. Like, we're in the whole FTX thing right now. Yeah. And I know a little bit about that. I did a solo thing on that. But it blows my mind that you can have like the CEO of WeWork, the CEO of FTX. These guys can get billion-dollar valuations and have no product. And you have women over here who have stellar businesses that are making money, and they can barely get a dime. And actually, I tell this story a lot. Sid actually called me out on this. Yeah. If you watch the podcast, I was like, how do you feel about the women, women in funding, and shouldn't that be? And she was like, absolutely, it should be, because people need to see that we can get that kind of funding. I was like, oh shit, you're right. You know what I'm saying? And then you talk to like Susan and all these women. They're going headstrong into this access to capital. Absolutely. Which is a huge deal.
We Angels just started here.
Ooh, tell me about that. I didn't hear that.
You haven't heard about We Angels here? It's basically a funding group. It's a program, a group of individuals who have gotten together that are creating a platform for females to have access to more funding, more exposure to it.
Good though.
So yeah.
Good.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I just like, and I've gotten older, and since you as you grow, and the funniest thing is like, you just start reading things. Like you just like, all right, I'm just going to read it. And it's just amazing. Like when everybody has access to capital like that, especially women, like there's no negative impact on society.
Absolutely not.
In fact, it's always triple net positive or whatever, right? Or more. And so it just blows my mind that we still have this thing. I mean, like, for me, solving a problem always goes back to like, well, why is the problem there to begin with? Like, I mean, you can go as deep into this as you want. We were talking before, like saying wild stuff, but like, what do you think? Like, why do you think this is happening? Because I think that's a really big question, so that we can start attacking however we need to like overcome some of this stuff.
Why do I think? Like,
there's a pay gap, or there's less access to capital for women. Like, it blows my mind.
Well, I think for me, I go by statistics. There's a lot of qualitative things out there, but what is quantifiable? What can we actually see out there? Well, like S&P, for instance, 500 companies, you see I think it's less than 4% that are run by female CEOs.
That's crazy.
Like, it's insane. So if you look at the people who are considered industry leaders or leading out, it is male dominated. And understanding how to balance that, understand female attributes and the value that they bring to the table is still a long time coming. And I think educating both parties on that, if you identify as male or female, educating how to come together, how to work succinctly with each other, which attributes have value, I think is highly important to actually bridge these types of gaps and these types of statistics. When we get into the qualitative side of it, I think it's more of just understanding what is brought, what is a value add. When you look at a lot of the studies that are coming out now about diversity and inclusion, companies that have diversity within different teams perform like 10x higher than, for the sake of this conversation, male-dominated companies.
Yeah.
It's exponentially, they outperform them. So I think it's just educating and getting people used to the idea that all of us are bringing different attributes and values to the table that actually creates this really synergistic environment to be in.
Yeah, I think I heard Kevin O'Leary, one of the sharks, he said like, he's like, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy mom, because she'll find the easiest way to get it done and then get it done.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
It was. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's playful, of course, but like he also has a point. Like we still work, and for me, I think a big part of this argument, one thing that I always try to like combat when I hear this is like, because you got We Angels, right? And I'm sure one of their things is like, we default to women, if not wholly women own businesses, which I think is great. But the argument is always like, well, isn't that like sexist or whatever? And I'm like, listen, I always go like this. I'm like, we live in America.
Yeah.
And the whole premise of this is, if I have the money, I can do whatever I want with it. So if I want to create a venture, a VC or a PE that only gives money to women, I'm in America, right? Like, I remember when the Jazz were doing this and they were only giving scholarships to like minority children. Yeah. I was like, that's great. And everybody was all like, that's racist or whatever. And I was like, no, because we live in America. They're a private owned entity. They can do whatever they want with their money.
Absolutely.
And by the way, and that's kind of like how I start, but obviously I think it's a good thing. Like, I think it's a good thing that you have minority scholarships. I think it's a good thing that you have women-only VCs. Like,
yes,
we
absolutely.
need to give people shots.
And this is not a zero-sum game, right?
Absolutely.
It is not going to take away from you if someone else is getting funding. Like, that's not really a thing.
Right, there's so much money.
And I think we have to stop thinking of it as a zero-sum game.
Right.
We have to think about what are the attributes, what are you trying to build, where are you trying to go with this, and does that interest me, and should I fund that? Yeah.
Now, this is always I ask this question a lot because I just love getting perspectives on it, but there's a balance of, and how do you help like empower women with this mindset? But there's a balance of like being held accountable. Like there is a little bit of like, we have to get, if we're going to get this done, we have to do it by ourselves. Right. And then the other side of it, which is like, the system is kind of rigged against us, right? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You kind of have to, but you gotta,
I do know. Yes.
Yeah. And both are true.
Yes.
But how do you like balance that when you're rallying the troops, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you like, look, we do need to like realize that this is us. Yeah. But also like, I do understand that it's going to be a lot harder for us, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think just accepting that's okay.
Yeah,
like going around. It's the start, right? We like to talk about these causes. We like to talk about these issues. But who is actually out there creating action, who is actually out there changing things.
Yeah.
You know, if you go into a company and you say, okay, your females are getting paid 30% less than male counterparts are doing exactly the same job as them, right? Pardon me. A company can't legally and technically go in there and say, oh, I just heard about this, so now I'm going to bump your pay 30%. You know, because, oh my goodness, can you imagine the coup that would happen, right? So the whole idea is understanding it's there and actually creating actionable things to fix it. Yeah. And it's okay us knowing this. It's okay me hearing it. One of the big things that has come up in my mind is there even within the female business sector, you know, you hear people saying, I don't want to be identified or stereotyped or labeled as a female CEO.
Right.
Right. I just want to be a
Well, that was
CEO.
the question I asked Sid, right? Like, why was the headline, you know, largest female-led round, right? Why wasn't it? Why can't we just like the and anyway, go ahead. But
Less than 3% of females receive funding.
Yeah, so we got to make it a point.
Let's make it a point, and that's okay. It's okay to do that. It's not going to take away from the legitimacy of what you do. In fact, I feel like it gives them a platform to say, legitimately, less than 3%, and we were able to accomplish this. Right. Now you can too.
Yeah.
Sid's big thing, just because you're talking about Sid, huge Sid fan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to I just remember this happening in our conversation, and she checked me, and I was like, yeah, you're right. I was like, you're right.
That's true. That's true. So to your point, I think it's okay to call that out. And I think it's okay to say, you know, we can accept that this is the case. So now let's figure out how to find a solve for it. Let's find a solution and overcome it.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's always the hard one, right? Because you never want to like I'm a huge empathy person, and so you never want to have somebody feel like they're not heard or they're not seen. But like at the end of the day, like we got to get some shit done. And
absolutely,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely,
like,
yes.
That should be a fire, not a roadblock. You know what I mean? It should be like this is the gas that gets us going. I think that's cool. So, how did you like get to this point in your career? Did you always was this like the goal when you were a kid?
This is
this
is awesome. We need to have Oprah and Dr. Phil in here with us. Okay, let's just be transparent here. Yeah. So I was one of those nerdy little girls that, and I say that endearingly because I'm a huge empath as well. I was one of those people that I wanted to be like Diane Keaton in Baby Boom. Right, where she is just killing it out there in New York. She is just taking on the boardroom, you know. Yeah. But I was not raised in an environment that was the thing, right? And so I had all these hopes and these dreams. I wanted to become a doctor. I was that kid looking in the encyclopedia at the time. You could not Google at this point. The encyclopedia, looking up like gross anatomy terms and all the things, right? Yeah. I just had all these huge hopes and dreams. But life happens, right? Culture happens, conditioning happens, whatever it is happens. And you don't end up in that place you think you're going to end up.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is wild. It is so wild. So to the point of being a single parent, that's actually what lit my fire. Is when you're faced with these situations where it's like this or that, choose X or choose the red pill or the blue pill. Yeah. You know, you make your choice. And for me, it was one of those things that talk about turning like trauma and tragedy into opportunity. For me, it was like, okay, this is the opportunity to do what I need to do what I want to do, and actually, because you know, there's no other option at this point. Like, it's do or die at this point. Is my children and me against the world, and we have to do this. So, you know, prior to that huge aha moment for me, I did a lot of things. I dabbled in a lot of business. You know, I designed, I built things, I fundraised for people, you know, consulted, did all of the things, dabbled in all the, I was an eternal student. I was always in school, right? I was that person. I was like, I want to learn about finance. I want to learn about accounting. I'll just go to school. There's a class for that, you know? And so I did all of those things. But what I found was when I was faced with that choice of what am I going to do? What is that little girl from way back? We're not going to count how many years, but way back in the day, what is she going to do now? You know, it actually created this opportunity for me to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my career.
Wow.
And I just happened to have that group of individuals around me who were cheerleaders. They were like, yeah, totally do it. Go out and kill it. What can we do? How can we help you? And I'm like, I have this idea. Well, let's do this. I can show you how to do that. You know? And then you just have to hone your skills, obviously, and just go out there and do it. Just start.
So were you in the corporate world prior to becoming a single parent?
I was in a lot of different ways. Okay, so cool. Way back in the day, I helped franchise some brick and mortar bridal stores.
Oh, sweet.
Did a lot of design work there.
Oh, cool.
There was a cement company in there somewhere. there was
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
There are offshoots of that. I dabbled in the event planning world because it was fun. And I just happened to have the aptitude and the patience to do it, right? And stress to me is like, whatever. Let's just laugh about it. And so I just had these opportunities that I was just willing to take.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things that got me to where I am now. If you're talking about the path and the trajectory that I've been on, so when an opportunity presents itself, it's a matter of prioritizing and saying, can I say yes? Can I say no? Yeah. And a lot of those opportunities I just said yes to. So yes, I was in the corporate world prior to now. But it was definitely a delicate balancing act. When you're talking about being a parent, at that time, the balancing act was there are other demands that I don't deal with now, but there were demands at the time that were the priority that I needed to choose. Right. And so my career path was eclectic.
There you go.
It was eclectic.
Yeah, there you go. But I really enjoy that part of the story because that's what it is, right? It's a part of your journey. Like that's what got you here today. You say yes to opportunities. You dig down and you figure it out, and that's like really what you have to do. Like if you want to get there, right? Absolutely.
And when you think about entrepreneurship, or there's the new term, right, of being a generalist.
Yeah.
Right. In the workplace. And it's like you have to have a broad skill set.
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of experience under your belt. And so for me, it's been one of those things as my career has developed, especially over the last 8 years, it's been like I can say yes to those things. Right. Because I know I'm going to figure it out, right? I'll be very transparent with you. I cannot go out and build a risk model for you, but I definitely understand it, and I can find the person that could do that for us. Do you know what I mean?
That's it.
So
Listen, that is what people don't get, because I'm the same way. Because I heard the full quote one time of that a jack of all trades is a master of none.
That's right.
But is still better than a master of one.
That's right. That is right.
You know what I mean?
Preach.
And you're like, yeah, because I do that too. Like people are like, well, how did you do this? Because they'll ask me the same question I'm asking you, and I get the same answer. I'm like, look, dude, you just have to say yes. Like I know enough about it. Like what you said, like I can't do that, but I know someone who can, and I know enough to have an intelligent conversation to know, like, I know what I need you to do, and I know what right looks like when it's delivered.
That's right.
So that's right. So it's like, screw everything else. Like, just give it to me. I'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Curiosity is a beautiful thing. I happen to be one of those kids that was always like, why, when, how, why? I still am to this day. Yeah. I'm always like, that's interesting. Why?
Yeah.
Please tell me. Please explain to me. I was sitting down with our social media director the other day, and I said, I need you to talk to me about the back end of this, like the technicalities of it, in the most like dumb, I hate to say dumb down because it's kind of derogatory, but dumbed down way. I literally said that to her. You can. So I understand what happens when I click something, what happens out there in social media land. Right. Actually, so I can fill in the gaps to monetize this. Right. And it's something where she is the expert in her field, and she was able to explain all these things to me.
Yeah. And that's how you know you got an expert too.
Exactly.
Because you also want to learn this stuff. But when I do that too, I'm also testing people. Like, do I have the right person? Because if you can water it down enough that I can understand it,
to understand.
then I know you got it, man.
That's right.
So let's go.
I love those people. I love those people who educate us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because you just and that's why when I talk to business owners who don't want to learn about accounting and don't want to learn about finance, I'm like, that's how people steal money from you.
Oh, absolutely.
When you don't know about accounting and finance, I'm like, so you got to know enough to know what's right and what's wrong. You don't have to be an expert, but you got to know. And a lot of people just don't get that. Like, a lot of people go out, like, I've heard tragic stories about like going out of business because somebody stole money from you.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you didn't know what an internal control was.
Yeah.
You didn't understand like the fraud triangle.
Yes.
Right? Like, you got to take these things away because like people are good, but we also have instincts. And if if it's my family, that's like the ethical dilemma in someone's head when they commit fraud, right? Like if it's my family or your money, I'm going to pick my family and take
right.
Your money. Yeah. Even though that's wrong. But you see what I'm saying? But
thank you for qualifying that statement, even though it's wrong.
But if you take away the opportunity for them to steal, but we're fine.
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
And it's just it blows my mind that people don't want to like explore, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Crazy. But I find that's what motivates me. I know I'm kind of stuttering there because I'm like, there's so many adjectives I could use for this. You know, people talk about their why, and it's usually some emotional affect. One of my whys, there are many, but one of my whys is like, I want to know. That's my why. I want to be educated. I want to learn. I want to learn a new skill set. I want to develop an attribute. I want to expand something.
I love it.
So for me, that's going back to the premise of what started this conversation was my career. Mm-hmm. That's been my biggest thing. That's been my biggest value add to any company that I go into is that's interesting. Let me try that. I'll do it. I'll take on the risk and I'll make it happen for you because it just, my little nerdy self that we talked about comes out and I'm like, oh, I'm going to figure that out.
Yeah. One of my mottos for that
I'll find
is
a solve for that.
Yeah. One of my mottos is like I'll definitely figure it out. And I go, and I always say, my favorite motto is far from perfect, but perfect from afar.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yes.
You're like, that's what it's going to be. We'll figure it out. We'll get it done.
Totally. I'm like, this may be a little messy, but it's going to be fun while it's messy.
Yeah, but it's going to be cool.
And we can iterate enough to make it beautiful.
Yeah. But you got to start. But that's the cool thing about like a generalist, right? Is like the advantage that a generalist has over a specialist is that we'll start.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if it looks ugly at first, right? And I had this. I heard we were at a mastermind, and I heard this female founder say, she was like, "Look, if your product is perfect, you launch too late." And I was like,
"Wow,
damn,
that's right.
Let's go."
Right.
I was like, "She's like, you just need to do it, right? It's gonna look crappy, and you got to be okay with it." Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about this because I was at the Consumer Summit. That was last year.
Yes,
right.
It was this year. I mean, it's still 2022.
Oh my gosh, man! I'm losing my mind.
There's another one coming up in April. Just I want you to know that.
The Consumer Summit?
Oh, it's going to be annual, year over year.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'll be there.
Okay.
But you were so this was the first year, and you were the mastermind behind it all. You were it. What was that like? Because that's part of like building community is like getting people in the same room who have the same values and want to learn the same thing. That by itself is really hard to do. Just in like. I can say I'm throwing an event and throw hundreds of thousands of marketing at it to get people there. Yeah. But like when I was there, it was just cohesive. Like people wanted to be there. They were excited to be there. We all had the same purpose. And that's hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
You know what I'm saying?
What's even harder to do, if I may add just one little layer on that.
Let me have it.
Is to get people there who aren't necessarily of the same mindset, who aren't necessarily there for the same goal. If you can get those people there and get their buy-in, you've now accomplished something.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, yes, what you're saying, community is why I do events.
Yeah.
Having, yes, as a collective, as a whole, but the interesting thing about community is when you start to pull it apart, we're each individuals that are a piece of that larger community, right? So for me, when I look at it holistically like that, but I also think, okay, how do we build this community? And what is that going to look like when we're done with the product? And you have to look at each individual person, and that's what excites me about events. Like, okay, let me take a sidebar for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Through the course of my career, talking about the dynamics within relationships, you hear a lot of, oh, so you order tablecloths and flowers. Good for you. You're going to get those, right? You're laughing because you've done events, right? I'm do you understand what it takes to do events?
Yeah.
The negotiations, the fundraising, the organization, right? The psychology side of it, which you're talking about, and the socioeconomic side of it, and what are you trying to build, and where are you trying to go? And like, there's all these dynamics to events. So let's just package this wholly first, and then let's talk about community. Okay, so back to community. One of the things that excites me about it is understanding that moment in time that person engages with something that you've created that allows them to be part of the whole. Yeah. Where they feel like they're now part of that one mindset that you talked about with a common goal, and they have all come together now, and they feel like they're part of that bigger mission, if you will. Yeah. Consumer Summit. That's what that was all about.
Yeah, and it was great. And it was like the first time, like normally I don't go to those kinds of events. Cause like, I don't know, I just like,
and you came to ours.
And that was the first one that I ever went to. Cause I was like, you know what? Cause at the time I looked at the price of the ticket and I was like, all right, whatever, let's go. Yeah. Right? Like, I'll go out to dinner with my family of 4 and spend more money on that. And so let's see what happens. And because but genuinely that's what my mindset was. But I got slapped upside the head when I got there because it was like amazing, right? It was wonderful.
I love that. I love to hear that.
Yeah, it was wonderful because but that's also, part of it. So talk about April. Do you know a lot of the details about April?
We are not letting the details out about April, but it is going to be bigger, badder, and on steroids.
Let's go.
So you know how launch year is. It's like you said, put out the first product. It might be a little,
No, it was great. Yeah.
It was, right?
It was great.
It was awesome. What was so great? I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah.
Like, what was so great about it for you?
You know what? I'm always, for me, it's always about the community side of it and the psychological side, because it was really cool to be there, to hear the panels, to hear everybody's different mindset. But you know what I was there for?
What's that?
I was there to network. I was there to get people on my podcast. That's how I met Sid. She came off the stage and she was, I don't know why she was in the crowd doing something. She probably wasn't supposed to be there. But I remember I just went up and I was like, loved your talk. I want you on my podcast. She's like, all right, here's my email. Yeah. That's how I met all these really cool people. So for me, it's always like, that's what I love is I love being the little fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
Cause you just get to soak it all up. I know. And the thing that makes this podcast cool and makes events like that cool is I know where I'm at. And I'm cool with that. I don't care. I don't need to be a big fish, right? I like to be in rooms where I can listen, right? I can talk less.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what it was for me. Because hearing and that's when I was introduced. I was like a little kid. At Halloween, because you had Susan Peterson and all the panelists in a circle, and these heavy hitters talking, and I'm just listening because I want to ask Susan if she'll come on my podcast, and I'm just like, and
I love your face right now.
And and I'm like, so I'm just listening, and then she gets we talking, but she's talking about we're gonna get more women in Utah money. We're gonna do that. We all need to get together, and it she was in a circle with hundreds of people around, but she was firing up that whole circle and everybody who could listen. And I was just and same with Sid and Davis Smith from Cotopaxi. He gave a great talk. And the way that everything is shifting was just really cool to for me, it was validating. Cause I've always had the idea that social media started to connect the world, but, and we've come back full circle because now social media is connecting our neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
So that we can come back to community, which I thought was fascinating.
I can't tell you how exciting it is to hear all of that because, of course, I'm taking it and I'm actually in April,
Well,
amazing things are happening. Well, see,
I'll be there.
All the things that you just talked about is what I love, the opportunity to do every single day. When you talk about career, when you talk about being a single parent, when you talk about this trajectory, everything that we've already talked about on this podcast, this is why I do it, is for this reaction. Exactly. Yeah. And the reason it's possible is because of our business community here in Utah. So going all the way back to being Utah. Yeah. You get heavy hitters in a room that are willing to sit on a panel, that are willing to sit on a stage and talk to, as you referred to, little fish. Yeah. I don't see it that way, but when you look at the dynamics in the room, yes, these people are absolutely extraordinary, and they're doing amazingly new and innovative things, and they're completely transitioning the Utah, economic landscape with these companies that they're building, and they're willing to sit in a room and a launch year at Consumer Summit. Yeah. And talk about all these amazing projects that they're doing, share information and knowledge, rub shoulders with you.
Well, and what's cool is everybody was funny, everybody was light, it was
absolutely
that was the cool part. I don't know if that was intended or not, but to me it was refreshing because it was oh, thank goodness. Because you go to some of these other summits and everything's scripted. Yeah. And I'm like, come on, man. I think when I think it was Susan, somebody was up there, and she was like, we had a MILF party or whatever. And then somebody called her out and she was like, well, you're not a MILF. And I was like, hell yeah, let's go. I was like, there you go.
I do not have issue with that term. Totally fine.
I don't either. It's fine. Whatever. Yeah. whatever helps you feel better. Yeah. I don't care either. And so that's really cool. Now, how do you navigate, this is a different question, right? Because you're building these events, and inevitably you have, I'm sure that you run into some ego, right? and not with anybody that we've mentioned before. And I don't even know if, and I don't, and you could hit me with this. I could hit you with this question. You'd be like, Don, you're full of shit, which is fine. But how do you navigate some of the egos? Because when you're building a community, you're going to run into this stuff. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody's going to do this. So
all the time. Yeah.
Like, how do you handle those situations? How do you run that?
Well, we're not going to name names.
Yeah, nobody that I've already said.
No, yes, of course not. Of course not. You know, the way I have been, I will say, blessed or developed. Sixes at this point. I tend to love people. I just love people. It's the whole inclusion, you know, thing that I have going on that I really embrace. I try to look at people holistically. I try to understand the whys. It goes back to my, goober side where I'm like, oh, why is that?
Yeah.
Understanding all of those things helps me personally navigate ego.
Yeah.
Because, you know, being where some of those egos are is, of course, like everybody else on this planet, where they have dealt with things, they have gone through things, traumas, triggers, you know, overextended accolades, you know, where it's like, yeah, I am the bomb diggity, and you know it, and I'm going to show you, you know, whatever the causation of that ego is. For me, it's easy to understand it, and just to be like, okay, I see you. I see you. So I need to perform in this way, you know, to help facilitate whatever you need to be doing.
Right.
And I'm okay with that. Yeah. I'm really okay with that. Now, obviously we start to get into a little bit choppier waters when that ego perpetuates something that's damaging, right?
Yeah.
And,
but I like how you navigate that, because if it's that, I mean, that's a really good way of doing it. Like, if it's not gonna, like, knowing what battles to fight and what to look
Of course.
You're like, all right,
Absolutely.
whatever. Like, we'll fight. We'll play this game. Like, let's do it. Because but that's also just important, like, in business in general, right? Like, you got to know, like, what battles to pick and what battles to lose, and you got to understand people's personality. But I think it just comes from that empathy perspective. Like, I'm a huge empathy, like, proponent too, because it's just like, you just win more, I think. Like, empathy used to be like this really woo-woo term, right? Yeah. But, like,
now it's
very it's very tactical too. Like, you're allowed to, like, you can be empathetic and still be really firm.
Of course.
And people can feel, like, I've had conversations where, like, people are like, man, I feel like you really care, but that was a really hard conversation. Because you're like, well, I do, but like, because we can't, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's part of empathy.
Yeah.
Is being able to do all of those and navigate those egos.
Being firm doesn't negate empathy.
Yeah.
Being firm is just like, you know what, I have my own personal boundaries, and this is how I operate.
Yeah.
And I can be firm with you. And to be honest, I need to give you feedback because, okay, you know, we need to get on the same page here. How can we do that? Where's the solution?
That's cool. Yeah. Any other events coming up next year? Besides the consumer summit that you can't talk about? If you can't talk about it,
we could talk about. We could throw some little teasers out there.
Okay.
Consumer summit.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
in April.
happening.
That's gonna be dope.
It is. Yes, it's happening. And we have actually, with Wasatch Innovation, we have partnered with them to do Win 50 Consumer. They do the Win 100. We're doing Win 50 Consumer.
What's the Win 100?
Oh my goodness, this is going to be amazing. So this is going to be the cool thing about partnering with Wasatch Innovation is you can nominate your consumer companies that you're aware of, right? And then we have, like, peer-to-peer nominations that actually decide who actually wins these awards and these accolades. So that's what's really cool about that.
Oh, that's
cool.
And
it ties into this whole thought leadership that we developed with Consumer Summit, right?
Which I enjoy.
There's so many consumer brands here.
Not
just in Utah, but at a national level. Like, we need to keep growing this thing.
Yeah.
So that's on the docket.
Cool.
And then we're developing a second kind of flagship event that will be headlined and sponsored by Brandless and Clark Capital Partners.
Well, then let's go. I'm excited. Well, you just got to keep an eye out, right?
We'll keep an eye out for that. We'll make that announcement around the Consumer Summit time for everybody. So cool. Keep an eye out for it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You said something, and my ADHD did not help me out.
You're fine.
I freaking lost my train of thought. But I'm excited because you guys definitely have a lot of stuff going. Here's what I was going to say. Utah is like, you have, like, silicone slopes, right? Like, that's what it's called. Because you got all the tech companies and stuff like that. But what's crazy and what I really gravitated to, I worked in tech for like 2 years, and I'll probably never do it again because it was terrible. I met a lot of really awesome people, but the tech scene wasn't me. Yeah. But then you learn about, like, because then you're like, dude, it felt like the only way to make it in Utah was tech. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what the heck? And but But actually, a turning point for me was the consumer summit, because you're like, holy crap, look at all these brands out here. We're in Share House right now with all the e-commerce brands in Utah. Like, there is so much more to Utah than whatever you want to say. Like, I'm from Iowa, so we heard all of the Utah stuff, right? But even like tech and whatever, religion or whatever, like there's so many cool things that happen that don't get the light as much as some of these other places, right? Like, I remember being in tech, and like we had they stopped working when they raised a couple million in funding. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I'm with a company right now that's gone through like 4 rounds. You never even heard about it, because it's just like, we don't need to do that. Like, we just no, you need to like move, right? And I'm not saying that's everywhere, but like that was the feeling that I got, and people are gonna hate me people are gonna say whatever they
I don't just care. Let them say it.
Yeah, but whatever, because that's just how I felt. But there's a lot of cool professionals here who are doing just insane things.
They're amazing. Just going back to everything we've been talking about with Consumer Summit, Utah, exactly all the points you just touched on. Yes, Silicon Slopes. Yeah. Yes, the Tech Summit. Yeah. Absolutely. But that has overshadowed all these other amazing things that are happening here in Utah. Right. And one of the really, really interesting things is, if you look at the underbelly of Utah, all of these investors and all of these companies are actually cross-functionally helping each other. We are all hand-holding on some level. And that's what makes Utah so dynamic and so interesting, is that everyone is kind of helping everybody else out. I mean, we have kids that don't play nice in the sandbox. You're going to find that everywhere. Yeah, but for the most part, predominantly, we've got this amazing ecosystem that's like, Consumer Summit, we'll jump on board with that. That's amazing. Yeah. Let me be involved. And then you end up with all the people that you saw on stage. Yeah, right?
which was cool. It was really fun. It was good. And kudos to you, to Brandless, for everybody pulling that off. Can't wait for the next one. Before I let you go, please let everybody know where they can follow you, how they get a hold of Brandless, all that good stuff.
Well, you can find us at brandless.com. Yeah. And then, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Cool. And all that'll be in the description. But thank you so much for being here, Taunya.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This has been fun.